This lady has lied to me so many times. I can't even believe it. And I often keep falling for it. The problem is that this lady that's lying to me is me. It's my fantasy self. If you're not familiar with the term fantasy self, it's an idealized image of yourself that you wish you were. And I think we can develop this in a lot of different ways. And a lot of them are through how we grew up, how we view other people, what we see on social media, how we wish to portray ourselves. It's just that that's not really the real us. Your fantasy self can trick you into doing all sorts of things that aren't in your best interest. It could be purchasing things you should not purchase, or not purchasing things that you should be purchasing in regards to your yarn and your projects. There's tons of other ways your fantasy self can lie to you and harm you, but we're just talking about the yarn related ones today. There's a couple more we'll get to in a minute. So let's tackle these purchases first. I know from experience, there's a couple things that I have purchased because I had an idea in my head of what I was like, but I just don't really live up to those self-imposed standards. And I think a lot of it, when dealing with social media, we see other people doing things and enjoying these projects, and we love the look of the projects or whatever, and we try to convince ourselves that we can do that, we'll enjoy it. And one of the things that I have purchased in the past and dealt with, made some different projects, is blanket yarn. People love blanket yarn. I see people making all sorts of things out of it besides blankets and amigurumi. Like I've seen hoodies that are super cute. I've seen all sorts of stuff. And I've got some blanket yarn in my stash. And the reality is I don't like working with it. I feel like I have to really work hard with my hands, and it causes me discomfort, and it has sat there. I know I can still probably use this. I don't feel like it's a total loss. I think that I'll be able to do like a toddler or baby blanket at some point with it if the right situation presents itself. So I'm not like frustrated that I bought it, but I'm also just like, the reality is it was my fantasy self telling me, no, you'll make a blanket out of this and you'll love it. In a previous video, I had touched on the fact that I have 3 skeins of, I think it's Pound of Love, in like a burnt orange color because it was on sale super cheap. And I had this glorious idea that a blanket, like an lapgan, would be amazing done in bobble stitches because it would look like tiny little pumpkins in a pumpkin colored yarn, which I still think would be amazing, and I love bobble stitches. But the reality of sitting down and then doing like a 4-foot by 6-foot blanket made out of bobble stitches, can you imagine how long that would take? But my fantasy self convinced me to buy 3 pounds of that yarn, thinking I'd do it. I still love the idea, but it's just not gonna happen. Thankfully, it's one of my favorite colors, so I know that I can do it and, use it in another project, and I've got enough. I could make like a cool duster or something with much larger stitches. So again, it's not a total loss, but it's been sitting here in my stash like 5 years. So that fantasy self got me again. And I think this can present itself. Those are just 2 examples from me. There's always like different weights of yarn or different fibers that we are happier to use and not as happier to use. And, we get swept up in things. We see other people completing beautiful projects, and we want to be like that. We want to have that cool project too. And that fantasy self tricks you into spending money to buy the thing that reality self isn't going to use. And as crocheters, we don't have like a ton of gadgets that we work with, but I think sometimes we can fall into like the trap of buying more hooks than we actually need. I've seen so many beautiful hooks on Instagram from like different small companies that make their own, and they've done such a good job. I mean, Instagram is all about, like the photography of it, the aesthetics of something. So these hooks can look super appealing, and in your mind you're like, yes, I want that whole aesthetic of everything that's going on in this video. I need to buy this hook. when really, your 20-year-old boy hook would work just fine. But this gorgeous wooden one is so appealing. And, a hook isn't terribly expensive, but again, it's one of those things, it can add up if your fantasy self is continually tricking you. Your fantasy self can also kind of rear its head in some different projects, not just the yarn and tools. Your fantasy self can talk you out of doing projects that you really, really love just because it might not be like the it project going on. And I think that's easy to do. We see all these wonderful videos and the newest thing, and it's easy to want to be part of that and feel the excitement of what's going on. My crochet tutor, my friend, she absolutely loves making little girl baby dresses, and she's made like little cardigans for some baby boys and stuff, and she just loves making those. And I love that she is not getting like swept up in all the different trends that she wouldn't really enjoy making. Like, she's honestly just stuck with what she loves, and it's helped her out a lot because she does feel really fulfilled making those, and she finds people to gift them to for different occasions. And I just think that's awesome. And along the same lines, your fantasy self can absolutely trick you into doing a project that everyone is doing and it's not suited for you. I've seen a lot of cool like crochet alongs and stuff. Some of them are pretty darn advanced, and if you're wanting to participate and be part of the group and you think, I just want to be part of this, but it realistically is above your skill level, then you can be giving yourself a lot of frustration. Those few times I was like trying to force myself to enjoy amigurumi, and I just wasn't, because I thought, everybody else loves making them. Why don't I love it? If I just try this harder, I'll like it. But I didn't. Like, don't we all just want to feel like we have it together and we're not stumbling through? Like, I think that's probably everyone's fantasy self, is like well organized, good at what they do and all that. And I think sometimes this image can be harmful because we're not being honest with ourselves and where we're at in life and with our craft, and we're not really enjoying the place we're at. It can stop us from making connections, because if you're not putting yourself out there and allowing yourself to be vulnerable and allowing other people to see your work or whatever, you could be missing opportunities to make other crochet friends. It might stop you if you're feeling like you're not living up to the image of how proficient you want to be. You're probably going to hold yourself back and not join that crochet group at the library or whatever, because there'll be other people there. What if they're more advanced from you? What if they see you do something wrong? What if you're just not cool enough? It can just really step in and stop us from being able to connect with other people, because that fantasy self is really trying to protect itself. I don't think it's easy to necessarily get rid of the fantasy self, but I think as long as we can acknowledge and notice when our fantasy self shows up, try not to take our fantasy self shopping with us. It can kind of help keep us a little more grounded and not get so caught up in the image of how we see ourselves or how we wish we were. I've picked up a few mohair yarns. I was able to thrift some, and they were really nice, and I had gotten a great deal on some at Hirschner's a while back, and I would absolutely love it if that was something that came easy to me. I do almost feel like those type of yarns might work better in knitting situations than in crochet, mostly due to the aspect of if you have to frog something. I have found it very, very difficult to frog that texture of yarn, but I'm so attracted to it. So that is really something I need to examine. And when I feel that little pitter patter in my chest, when I see that yarn, and really stop and think, Shannon, is this really what you want? Are you really going to use this? Or is this just something you wish you liked using, or something you wish you were good at using? When I was building my yarn stash, I had a tendency of, when there was a great sale, buying yarns for people or with people in mind. So I would think, well, so-and-so loves this color. So-and-so loves this sports team, things like that. And this caused me to purchase yarns for other people. And that has not proven to be a way that I've actually used yarns. Those are the yarns that have stuck around in my stash, and I have since rehomed because I just wasn't using them. They weren't appealing to me. I had it in my mind that I was just going to make gifts for everyone and everyone would love my gifts. And that's not the reality. That is a fantasy. Probably the absolute worst lie my fantasy self has ever told me is manifest in a couple different ways, but it's, you don't need to write it down. You'll remember that. And I do not remember whatever it is I told myself I would remember. By far the biggest lie my fantasy self has told me. This has come to what hook I'm supposed to be using for a project. If I am trying to come up with a pattern for something and I'm in the moment and I'm working through it and I think, no, I'll remember what I did. I'll remember how many rows I stitched here. I don't. And that has messed me up because then when I try to replicate the product, it does not turn out right. Thinking that I'll remember what row of a project I'm on when I'm following someone else's pattern, didn't write it down, not being able to get a center pull, so taking the ball band off, losing the ball band, and thinking I'll remember what yarn I was using, purchasing yarn with a specific pattern in mind, but then not writing down the pattern, so when the yarn gets here a couple weeks later, I can't remember why I bought it. There's so many ways that lie has been the biggest impact on me. So yeah, I definitely have to write everything down. I cannot listen to my fantasy self saying that I'll remember something. It's always good to dream and aspire and plan and expose ourselves to new things that do inspire us, for sure. It's just that line of getting wrapped up into it to the point where we're not being realistic with what our temperament and what our personality is like, or what we're physically able to do. Sometimes it can be you have the physical ability of doing certain crochet stitches, but our hands just can't do it. Or maybe our eyesight isn't super good, like different things like that, that we do kind of need to come to terms with a little bit when it comes to what our fantasy self is telling us as far as what to buy and what projects to do. Has your fantasy self told you any lies lately? I would love to know what they are down in the comments. I'm just curious if you have had the same issue as me. I feel like I can't be the only one who has lied to myself about my abilities and personality. I just don't think I can be, but let me know if you have been tricked by yourself as well. I want to thank you so much for talking yarn with me today. Bye.